Hello everyone! A few viewers have been asking to see my deck building process, and a surprising number of people have flat out asked for deck building advice. I thought this topic would already be covered well on YouTube, but upon watching some videos about it, I discovered that the lessons taught are far from the ones I would impose on people who felt lost about deck building. Not to say these videos aren't good, they have decent information. They just miss out on points that I feel are crucial to communicate for players seeking advice. I intend for this video to be a one-stop shop for resources and information you need to build a commander deck that you love, regardless of if you're a new player upgrading a precon or an enfranchised expert trying to expand into a new brew that you are unsure how to start. Part 0. Pitfalls. There are many methods you can use to build a deck you enjoy. This video will just touch on my method. There's no single correct way. There are, however, definite wrong ways to go about building a deck that you should know about first. One way I see people poison their thinking is by relying entirely on EDHRec. An EDHRec page for Commander is just a collection of data scraped from deck lists people posted online. Decks that very likely people used EDHRec to build. Hopefully you can see that this is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you want a more in-depth dive onto this topic, check out this video by Snail, because we've got to move on to talking about deck building templates. These are training wheels that restrict your thinking. You've seen these before. A deck needs 10 to 12 pieces of ramp, 7 target removal, 37 lands, 10 card advantage spells. The sooner you forget the arbitrary rules templates like this enforce upon your commander deck, the better time you'll have playing it. Mana production, interaction, wraths, ramp. These are all things that are not one size fits all. By tailoring these numbers to your commander, you'll have a better time and win rate over someone who applied an average rule to a not so average deck. Those warnings out of the way, it's time to start the deck building process. Part 1. Research. The earliest phase of deck building should be formulating foundational goals for your deck, the most important of which being, what cards do you want to play with? Not necessarily even what commander do you want to play with. Any cards are valid answers to this question. Small issue though, you need an understanding of what cards and strategy would be fun for you, and then expand upon what you already know. If you have absolutely no basis for what would be fun for you, EDHRec serves its purpose here. After identifying a color or theme you enjoy, you can browse cards that are played in those categories with ease. The important thing is not to stop here. Take a note of all the cards you like, whether from EDHRec or somewhere else, and use God's Gift to Brewers, Scryfall, to find more cards that are similar to them. You can get a lot of mileage just by using the search command FO:, and in quotes, write portions of rules text that make the card interesting to you. Once you're comfortable enough with the wording of magic cards, you can search for strings of rules text that would be perfect for your deck, even if you don't know the rules text you're searching for even exists on a card. Check out this video for a more in-depth guide for Scryfall syntax. It's one of the best I've found. Anyway, now that you have an expanded list of cards that you're interested in, it's time to break them apart. Not literally, but what I want you to do is appreciate the nuance in the cards you want to play. When you pick a card to go into your deck, you should try to actively divine every unique aspect of the card. Let's do an example. Pause the video if you need. Can you tell me every aspect of this card that enables synergy? You probably noticed that she can be your commander, that she is Abzan in colors, that she's a human soldier, that she puts 1/1 counters on things when she attacks, that she has 4 power and toughness, and that she has a grave hate effect. But did you notice that her mana value is 3? She has 4 power and 4 toughness, but did you take the time to think about cards that synergize with creatures that have equal power and toughness? Did you notice the fact that she only puts the counters on tapped creatures? Are you going to attack with those creatures? Or would you rather keep them back and find a safer way to tap them? Don't let this overwhelm you. In fact, you shouldn't build all these synergies at once. Narrowing your deck's theme to one solid idea is crucial to have it function well. But When you have an understanding of the adjacent synergies that are available to you, you'll begin to notice how to develop a sub-theme which leads to a more nuanced, powerful build. Savine's Reclamation, for instance, has nothing to do with +1/+1 counters, but if your curve includes a lot of permanents under 3 mana value, then it's going to be damn good in your Anafenza deck, I can promise you that. You can then lean into that 3 mana value or less theme as much or as little as you want to from there. Now that you've defined what makes your cards unique, it's time to get back onto Scryfall and search for synergies for your synergies. The best way to teach what I mean here is with an example. Let's start with the beginning. Taking Anafenza again, let's say you want to build her with a counters theme. So you search for cards that mention +1/+1 counters. Oh look, you find one that has an ability that triggers when +1/+1 counters are put on it. And you find that interesting. So you search that portion of that card's rules text in Scryfall, and you find this card, Evolution Witness. Now you could stop here, but if you like this card, wouldn't it be cool if there was a card that synergized with it? Well, there is one. If you know the wording of the cards Tormod, Insidious Roots, or Sir Conrad, then you'll have an inkling of what to search. By entering wording similar to those cards, in addition to the term +1/+1 counter, you find this card, Thran Vigil. With this and the Witness, you get a loop of returning a creature card from your graveyard to your hand with the Witness, which triggers Thran Vigil, which then lets you put a +1/+1 counter on the Witness. Repeat until you run out of targets. From here, what if you had a discard outlet? Or maybe you seek to make Thran Vigil more consistent in your deck by running cards like Archpriest of Shadows or Unnatural Restoration, which still do things with +1/+1 counters, but also have ways of bringing cards out of your graveyard. You'll probably also need to fill up your graveyard for these synergies as well. So why not run a parcel of cards in your interaction package that are creatures that sacrifice themselves? Look, this one even proliferates. This deep dive on top of a deep dive is what gives decks texture. Going this deep on a build gets you an intimate understanding of the deck's game plan. Not only does this make you feel rewarded for your work when you win with the deck, it also makes you a better player because you know every interaction your deck has to offer because you put it there with purpose. With time, you will even find this research and discovery portion of deck building incredibly fun. After you get a cool list of cards, it is time to talk about Part 2, Evaluation. If you've played Magic for any amount of time before, you've probably heard the terms rate or card quality. What this refers to is the power level of a card compared to its cost. You want to cut cards with bad rates, but how do you tell the good from the bad? You can discern the rate of a card by making comparisons to other cards you know about. For example, Play with Fire is a better card than Shock. This much is true, but both are worse than Lightning Bolt. The extra damage of Bolt killing 3 toughness creatures matters a whole lot more than the scry off Play with Fire when you point the spell at a player. Due to the singleton nature of Commander though, it's important not to get caught by a fallacy here known as framing. For instance, Mana Drain is better than Counterspell, so you should cut Counterspell, right? No, probably not. If you have a deck that wants to cast Mana Drain, you probably want the Counterspell as well. These cards both have good quality. The more Magic you play, the better you will get at assessing rate by comparison. There are ways to discern a card's quality though without needing to have points of comparison. You simply do this by picturing in your head when drawing the card would feel good, and then when drawing the card would feel bad. This is known as a ceiling and a floor. Take the spell Basri's Solidarity. This card is fine when you have a ton of creatures in play. With 6 creatures, it's a 2-mana 6/6. Not to mention, you pick up a trigger or 2 from those creatures that like having counters put on them. However, what percentage of the time is this board going to be in play? One where you have stats and value from the Basri Solidarity. Would you rather run Lethal Scheme, which needs you to tap that board to get the counters, but it's instant speed and always a removal spell when you draw it, even when your board is completely empty? Be careful. Some cards appear to have extremely low floors, but the high ceilings make it worth it. You never want to draw a mana dork on turn 6 or 7, for example, but in the early game, the acceleration is game winning. Which brings us to our next topic, how to offset cards with low floors. Part 3, Ratios. After all this research into what cards you want to run, and trimming down the cards you think are of poor quality, it's time to talk about ratios. Simply put, how do you want your deck divided for maximum power? Instead of leaning on a template, let's look at what templates are based on. Math. Using a Hypergeometric Calculator, we can figure out how much of each card you'll want in your deck. Let's talk about those mana dorks from earlier. You want enough dorks where you'll draw 1 to 2 in the early turns, but not too many where you'll draw multiple and be left gassing out with no real synergy to speak of. Take the calculator and plug in a 99 for the population size. Put a 10 into the sample size that represents your opening 7 in your first 3 draws, a 6 into the successes in population, and a 1 into the successes in sample. This tells you that with 6 dorks, you'll see 1 in your opening 3 turns 48% of your games. Is that enough for you? Here's where deck building becomes more of an art than a science. You have to eyeball these percentages for each of your crucial card types and figure out when it sounds like a number you're happy with. These percentages will fluctuate with your commander as well. If your commander is a ramp card or encourages a low curve, you probably don't need as much ramp in your deck. Is your commander a payoff? Then you can probably do with cutting some payoffs from your deck. Vice versa if your commander is an enabler. Lastly, for ratios, I have to mention a rather infamous part of building decks. Lands. Or more specifically, your mana base. Mana can come from lands, artifacts, creatures, and you should be considering all of them when you craft your deck. You need to take into account 2 things when deciding these cards: colors and quantity. Frank Karsten has 2 articles touching on both of these 2 things. I consider these must-reads for any Magic player. Compare your hardest to cast cards with his stipulations for a good mana base. If they don't align, well, it's probably best to either adjust your mana or cut the card. How do you know when your ratios are right? Well, that's when we get into Part 4, Playtesting. After using research, rate, and ratios to trim your commander deck down to a perfect 99, you should now have a mediocre commander deck. You're not likely to hit the ball out of the park with your first draft. Try a few practice games where you play out the first 5 turns. Only after doing this and getting a few games under your belt will you realize what you messed up about your deck. You don't draw enough cards. You don't have enough payoffs. Your cards are too expensive. You have too much acceleration. This can be fixed by simply adjusting the deck by using the previous steps again. After iterating on the deck a few times, you'll finally have a pile of cards that works just right. And from there, you can continue on to the last step. Part 5, Maintenance. This is the easiest step. Once you have a commander deck you're happy with, all you need to do now is track each new set release. Read through the cards in the set and compare them to the cards in your deck. Would this new card work better than the lowest performing card of its type? Try it for a few games. Worst case, you can just swap it back to how it was. These changes aren't permanent, and you shouldn't be afraid of experimenting. And with that, we've reached the end of how I build my commander decks. I know this whole process sounds like a scary, strict science, but at the end of the day, you can cut it up, swap the steps, and do whatever it takes for you to build the perfect deck. These aren't hard and fast rules. It's merely what I've had success with. Links to every tool, video, and website I used or referenced in this video will be in the video description. Normally, I leave off my videos with a casual question. This one will be slightly more structured than normal. Tell me, is there any part of my process that has you confused? For this question, I'll answer it to the best of my ability and update a pinned comment with an FAQ so your question helps others who see this video later. There is another question I want to ask though. If you tried this process and are still struggling, is there a specific deck that you need help building? Answer in the comments below and tell us how far you got, what cards you found, and maybe I or another person in the community here can help you finish your deck by pointing out cards or synergies you might have missed. Happy building, and until next time, bye!